If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This is Robert Picardo, the holographic doctor from Star Trek Voyager, and Commander Woolsey from Stargate Atlantis. You're listening to Mike the Birdman and the rest of the Twig crew on This Week in Geek.net.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to This Week in Geek and Botched Roll. Only on, well, technically 2 websites. This is on thisweekingeek.net, but also my Patreon, Fox's World of Adventure. And Botched Roll is the role-playing game show where I have a chance to talk about one of my favorite hobbies that I've really had a chance to enjoy during the course of my lifetime. I might be talking about writing. I may be talking about creating. I could be talking about anything from Call of Cthulhu, Shadowrun Battletech, Hunter, The Reckoning, Werewolf the Apocalypse, or even today's topic of discussion, Star Trek Adventures and beyond. But I'm not going to be alone today as I travel into where no one has gone before. I'm inviting Michael Dismuke on the show, or Dismuke rather, and he is...
You had it right the first time.
Damn it. But I'm welcoming Mike here on the show. He is one of the hosts over at Star Trek's Continuing Missions, where him and the line editor, Jim Johnson, get together and chat with different people in the RPG industry, but mostly people from Star Trek, but anybody who offers an interesting perspective on it. Now, I was recently a guest on their show, as I am one of the freelancers over at Modiphius, and it was a nerve-wracking experience, but a fun one, because now I can say I work in this industry, and it still feels weird to say that. So, Mike, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thanks, man. Don't worry. The feeling never ends. You'll always feel weird anytime you work for like an IP like Star Trek. Even there's not an actor, writer, novelist who does it who doesn't sit there going, I can't believe it.
It's so strange, but it like when we did my episode of Continuing Missions, it literally came because I sent out a chance email. And one thing, I can't discuss the specifics of it because I don't know if it's going to happen, but you gave me some really good friendly advice after the episode, like a couple of days later. And you pretty much said to me, you know what, if you want to work in this industry, shoot your shot. Just don't be afraid. Try, see what happens. So I took your advice and I emailed a IP company that I am very familiar with. I'm sure some of you probably can guess what IP it might be, but I'm not telling you. And I heard back from them just after American Thanksgiving. They're like, hey, let me introduce you to so-and-so and let's see what happens. So the person who's the PR person over there gave me a really nice introduction. And I met the people in charge of the line and like, hey, what do you want to write for us? Can we see some of your samples? We'd be excited to talk with you. Please let us know. So let's just say I'm excited and I have you to thank for that. And that was just a tremendous, it's inspiring. One thing I've learned from Star Trek Adventures, specifically from you and Jim, to paint people a idea of the group that I have the opportunity to work with and who you are. I have never worked with a group that is so supportive of each other. Like, we have a Star Trek Facebook group where a lot of people can come out and just talk, and I always see you and Jim being so helpful to other people, and just the Star Trek community is unlike anything I've ever dealt with before. So I'd love to hear, Mike, what's your perspective on what makes Star Trek Adventures different from other role-playing games? And then I want to get into knowing you as Mike the person.
Sure. So Star Trek Adventures is a different role-playing game, I think, is because it's designed around the premise of Star Trek the TV show, which is IDIC, infinite diversity and infinite combination. It's probably one of the most inclusive games I've ever seen, and it's based off dreaming how the future could and should be. So I think that's really what happens. I've never been a dungeon crawler. I know it's strange to think I've been playing RPG for nearly 35 years. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons or a fantasy game. I've always kept it with Marvel or sci-fi or robots and mechs. That's always where I've leaned. But I've always kept my games also where I really enjoy happy endings. Sometimes, pathos is fine, but generally I want people to feel refreshed the same way someone feels when they walk away from a Star Trek episode, that same kind of happiness. So I think that's what makes Star Trek Adventures different, is as a writer, you're trying to figure out how to make it as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, I mean, when I wrote some of my stuff for the Star Trek Adventures second edition core rulebook, I was asked, Mike, could you write infinite diversity and infinite combinations? And it was nice to write something that was very uplifting and very positive. And watching the interactions on the Facebook group, I never see people arguing over additions of the rules. I never see people arguing. Basically, I never see people arguing, come to think of it. It's always like, hey, what can I do to make my games better? What tools exist? And Star Trek has been one of the most, to overuse a word, very wholesome community that I've met on there.
Yeah, I have to compliment the moderators for many of those social forums because they refuse to let it go there. I generally am never on social media unless it has to do with writing, and for Star Trek in particular, just because I just don't deal with toxicity. I don't deal with negative criticism of TV show. Like some people get on there and want to bag a TV show. I'm like, what do you care? You're not getting paid. Maybe they're like, well, I come on social media to do that. Okay, well, that's not what the Star Trek Adventures community is like. So I really appreciate the moderators, whether it's Discord, Reddit, Facebook, these other places, that when something like that happens, they shut it down really quick. So again, that keeps it a welcoming environment for people who are coming to learn the game, not to get into a discussion of whether, Spock versus Michael Burnham. We're just not doing that.
So you had mentioned something very interesting just 30 seconds ago. You've never played Dungeons and Dragons. So I guess that's going to lead into a lot of my questions today for you is, what is your RPG journey? Because like everybody I know, especially around my age, we all started with D&D. You might get the odd person who started out in like Shadowrun or something,
Okay.
but
I'll be really odd for you then. So
yeah.
I was 13, 14 years old over my friend Roman's house in Palo Alto, California. And he knew I was big into Marvel Comics. He was into comics too. So he pulled out a hard copy of the Champions game and he showed me how to build a character. And then it was cool, but somehow I went to the store and I found Heroes Unlimited. And so from Heroes Unlimited, I started playing probably around age 14. And that was cool. We kept designing it, but again, it wasn't Marvel. And we were designed it. I was running these games with a couple friends of mine, including someone who used to babysit me. I know it sounds weird being 14 years old and babysat, but sometimes there was a couple that I would stay at their house while my parents are out and about. And the husband, who's still a dear friend of mine, he would play Heroes Unlimited with me. We created him a character. Then all of a sudden I came across, someone gave me their collection. Oh, it was a good friend of mine named Dan. I went to his house and he gave me the TSR collection of Marvel superheroes RPG, Phaser Rip. That was it. That was the next 28 years of gaming for me.
Oh my God, 28 years under Phase Rip. Holy shit.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We had one group. They moved around, and so we played by email, then we played by WhatsApp, then we played by Discord. But it was the same characters for 28 years. We tried out the card system with, when they came out with the card system for RPG, we switched over there. Then we tried the Margaret Weiss system, if you remember that one. It was pretty cool, plot points. But then in the end, we ended up spinning back to old Phaser Rip because the universal table is so easy to use when you're playing remotely. That was 28 years of gaming. And then we took a hiatus because like a 3-year hiatus, and not playing RPG for 3 years was bad for me, very bad for my mental health. I learned that it was a big creative outlet for me. And as I started looking for something again in 2017, I picked up the Living campaign through Star Trek Adventures when they were game testing it. And I started running that Living campaign, started the blog, continuing missions in 2018, writing frantically about the game because I really liked it. I thought it was simple to use. And Jim Johnson reached out to me. He's the product manager for Star Trek Adventures. We were writing so much that he reached out and in 2020 asked me if I would like to write for the line. Of course, I wept in my pillow and also probably wet my pants at the same time. And that's how I got into writing for Star Trek. And I've been doing that ever since.
You mentioned something in there that I have a feeling some of our listeners may not be totally familiar with. So I know for me, I've actually did this. In fact, Star Trek was actually my first play in this type of universe is play by email. Very shortly, what is play by email for those of our listeners who may not understand what that is?
Sure, PBEM, we used to call it PBEM. So what would happen is I had a friend who was in Germany, I had a friend who was in Idaho, I had a friend who was in San Diego. These are all the same kids and people I played that original Marvel game with, and they, life takes you places. Some went to college, some had to move for jobs. So what we would do is I would write the story, and then I would send it to them. And they would write back. They would just keep continuing the story in the email. And then they come back and they want to do an action and they know to stop. And I would tell them what they have to roll to do. And it's very it's very plotting, email gets longer and longer and longer and longer, but you have the entire story. We used to get basically what we said, we got through one comic book a month. And by the end of the month, we had this mini novella, and I would take those novellas and I kept them all. So I have 28 years of gaming written down in synopsis or mini novella format. And so I memorialized it, which really was it taught me how to write. RPG taught me how to be a prolific writer because I was writing every single day. And nowadays, like writing every day is no big deal for me. It was some of the best practice doing that play by email.
That's something that I've also kind of noticed is like, as long as you keep writing, it doesn't even matter really what. It helps. I know, just to tell a little bit of my personal story with that, is I was taking creative writing during COVID, and I was always having to write stuff for class. And then I somehow fell into spoken word poetry here in my local town of Guelph. And it just became a thing. I would go to poetry slam, snap my fingers, might win $100. And then I started writing for other podcasts, and I was surprised how easy the process became over time. And I thought I was pretty good because I kept pretty consistent, but it's not 28 years of continuous writing. Wow.
Well, I tell everyone too, and anyone who's listened to Continuing Conversations, the podcast, hear me say this probably 10 times, but people who want to learn to play the guitar, every day they pick up the guitar and they play for 15 minutes and tinker around with different chord structures, or they play for an hour and no one listens to them. They don't say, well, because I don't have an audience, I'm not playing the guitar. If you want to be a writer, it has to be the same way. You got to pick up your keyboard. You got to write 15 minutes a day. It doesn't matter what you write. You start studying language. You start studying paragraphs, which are fluidic. And I say that because I don't believe that there's a proper way to write. I think writing can be poetry. So you do it every day. And once you do that every day, once you're given an assignment and you get a job to write, all of a sudden you're like, okay, no problem. I can pump out 2,500 words a day or something. You're just in that. It's just a new song you're playing. And so that's basically what I've trained myself over all these years inadvertently, was writing as a daily exercise for me.
Well, actually, that's something I kind of want to dig into too, because I love talking with people that understand the creative process. Like, how does your creative process start? Like, for me, I sit down at my keyboard. Literally, what else am I going to do? But I listen to music, and sometimes if I want to write very spiritually, I'll listen to anything indigenous theme. If I want to write action, I'll listen to new rock. That's right, you Linkin Park kids. Or if I want to write something very emotional, I'll go to very sad places for myself, and I'll go revisit those memories that pull out those emotions in me. Where does your writing process, or basically walk me through your creative day, because I'd love to hear this.
Yeah, so music's always a must for me. If I'm just tinkering around and having fun, then I'm probably going to be falling into jazz fusion. That's like Chicoria, Pat Metheny, Jean Leponte. You know, this far out jazz that just opens the mind, and I just really believe that that works. But if I'm writing for a genre, like say for instance, like Star Trek. I'm actually going to use jazz fusion for Star Trek because that does inspire me, maybe some classical. But recently I completed a novel, which is at the editors. I hope it comes out within the next, 2 years. But I used, pardon me, I went onto Spotify and I used the sci-fi dark themes channel, and I just kept playing that as I was writing that because it's a very like noble, bright sci-fi space opera kind of thing. So it depends on what I'm writing. Just like you, I'll change the tone. So
So
that's the music piece of it.
when you want to write something emotional, I mean, obviously, is a very big part of it for you. When you want to pull out something emotional, because Star Trek, I find, at least in my experience, it usually has these very uplifting, very bright tones, but there are some very dark
Hmm.
pieces to it as well. Like, for example, one of the sidebars I wrote from the perspective of a Federation colonist that was like, well, you know what, man? What if the Borg come? What if they're Orion pirates? They might get here, but I'm going to have to deal with that. I'm out here and there's no one that could potentially come. Like, where do you pull certain emotions from when you want to elicit that response?
And again, are you asking me musically or when I'm just
Yeah,
writing?
both. Like, is there any piece that really pulls certain like anger and fear? Like, where do you pull those from when you're kind of writing from? Like I said, I pull a lot from personal kind of memory, but when it comes to music, I
I
may pick something that, maybe a very bad piece of my life happened to this song.
I have a lot. I have a huge musical repository. My Spotify. I mean, I thousands and thousands of songs. I listen literally to everything. So I'm usually going to go when I'm writing. I cannot have songs with lyrics. So I'm going for the tone, and so that's why if I'm writing a space opera, I'm definitely going to go with I'm going to go with sci-fi dark theme music because it's just more dramatic and it's weird. I don't know why it happens, but it seems that whenever I'm writing, the music seems to match. If it's off, then I just forward to the next song. But generally, it's the weirdest thing, and it really inspires me. And sometimes I'll go back and because I'm still in the middle of the scene. I'll just replay the song again because it's capturing the tone of what I'm writing.
So when you are writing for Star Trek and now you've had a chance to like game master this sort of thing, tell me about your first Star Trek Adventures game.
Ooh, boy. Are you talking about the first one I ran or the first one I
Oh,
wrote?
I would love to hear both of them because like running it and writing it are two very different things. For me, I've only had a remarkable few experiences playing it. Writing, obviously, I'm getting a lot more, but they both draw from both different creative experiences. For example, what I'm going to ask you right now, with your first time playing Star Trek Adventures, who was your first character? Who were they?
Well, I was the game master. So
Hmm.
the first time we created a vessel which is still in service, it's the USS Pioneer 74700 Intrepid class ship.
Ooh.
And we originally had started using some established characters because the players were not that familiar with Star Trek, but they knew some of the characters. So B'Elanna Torres was the captain of the ship. It was 5 years after they came back from the Delta Quadrant that she was asked to explore the Shackleton Expanse. So we based all the
Cool.
stories, generally most of the stories, off of the Living Campaign, which you can get for free off Modivius.net. And they give you a lot of fodder for that. But what happened is over the time, some of the players were unable to continue playing, and the ones who wanted to join, we let them create their own character. So generally, I'd say 75% of the games I run are based off the mission briefs or modules that I have written for Modifius, or some of my favorite authors have written for Modifius. 25% of the games might be just free form that that have not been published yet. I am fortunate to play with a group of writers, most of who have published stuff for Modifius. So we oftentimes beta test the stories on ourselves and the modules before they go to publication. So I'm playing games that may not come into print for 1 or 2 years. And that helps us kind of flesh out what works and what doesn't.
Now, you mentioned mission briefs. Now, for those of my listeners that don't understand, what are those in relation to Star Trek Adventures? Because I know you can purchase those on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase them directly from the website as well.
Well, what's cool about mission briefs is they're free. So every mission brief is a pack of 10 templates. So basically what you have is one page. We write out what the major beats are in the story. So I like those actually the best because they give you a lot of flexibility with how you want to take it as a game master. Sometimes I take 2 mission briefs stories, I put them together, and I do that classic A plot, B plot that we see in Star Trek episodes. And that's a fun way to make it really feel like the TV show. So those are the mission briefs that are free. You can just type in mission briefs in Modifius, and there's, I think, 30 of them. Plus, there's a bunch scattered all over the different books and that campaign modules that Modifius publishes. Then there are the modules, and what the modules are, you do have to pay for those. Usually they're around $5.99. Worth it because they're more for maybe inexperienced GMs who need a little bit more hand holding about what the encounters and dice rolls should be, and maybe you want some maps and maybe you need some stats for the characters. Those tend to be about 24 pages, I think, and they're going to just be the more, the kind of thing you see when you're picking up any kind of module for an RPG. This gives you a little bit more meat, but I don't view them as stories. I view them really more like a bunch of puzzle pieces put together, like encounters that you as a GM can choose what to give your players. I mean, I've picked up a module and maybe only used 1 or 2 things out of it because I like some concepts. Another time I maybe used all the details because I just wasn't into creating and I just wanted to have someone else do the work for me.
I guess one of the other things that's kind of come out of the whole Star Trek Adventures community is your podcast. And I'd like to talk about, like, how did all that happen? How did that start? And you mentioned like the living campaign and whatnot, but how did you get involved, getting Jim involved, and who are some of the guests you've had on this show? Because there's, like, you and I have talked off air, like you've had quite the laundry list of interesting people.
Yeah, it's been crazy. It was unexpected. So originally actually started with me and the producer, Studio Tembo, Jeff Harvey. He's the one where we had met online on social media, and he asked would I want to do a couple shows with him explaining some concepts around playing the game. Jeff only can make it, I think, about 4 or 5 episodes, maybe 8 episodes, and was going to school and all this stuff, and he could no longer sustain doing a weekly podcast. So I asked Jim Johnson, who had come on as a guest, I was like, hey, you want to do this and see if we can get, originally we were only going to do like 10 episodes. 162 episodes later, what happened is we always had something to talk about, which is why we call it Continuing Conversations. And what I found out was the Star Trek community is very generous. So we started just asking all the writers to come on, artists, creators of the show, novelists like Dayton Ward, New York Times bestselling author Dayton Ward, Scott Pearson, Derek Tyler Attico, who wrote the Cisco Autobot, Kelly Fitzpatrick, who did the Captain Marvel book recently. Like, people just started saying yes. And it's just that way where we just get a lineup. And then another thing one of my favorite things to do is to invite fans on the show. Like, come talk with us, come riff on this subject about Vulcans or Romulans. And those have become some of our highest ranked shows, is where we just bring fans on to talk about their love for the game. And then again, we've had Heather Amos and from the Star, she's the editor for Star Trek the Comic, including Colin Kelly, Colin Kelly, Jackson Lansing, the writers of the comic books. You know, it's a small world. Eric Campbell, STO. It's just, I can go on and on and on. The point of the matter is, every time we invite someone, they say, hey, you should have so-and-so on also. And it's become this domino effect of goodness. So again, we're going into our 4th year, and I'm just thrilled with how much people are into this game and just want to support its success, and they get the word out there for us. Even you coming on our show, and you inviting us on your show. It's just like, it's just a really nice community. And I think this is the reason why I'm going to say it's selfish, because I remember when TSR stopped producing stuff, Marvel TSR, I was so upset that I didn't have this high quality RPG material to play with, and now I had to start doing all my homebrew stuff. And I think it's selfish what I'm doing with Star Trek Adventures, promoting it, because I don't want them to stop publishing books. We had a gap of about 30 years between, or 25 or 30 years between the Star Trek Generation technical manual, which is gold, platinum level, Trek fodder. And now with the Star Trek Adventures books, we're getting stuff that I know that the writers of the show are actually looking at, and Thomas Maroney over at Star Trek Online is looking at, and they're using it as basis for research, because we didn't have anything for years except maybe Memory Alpha or Memory Beta. But now these books, high quality books, are getting used. So it's selfish, because I'm like, I got to keep pumping it out there. I got to keep getting converts, because I don't want these books to stop being published.
One of the things I've always wanted to say, and I've said this on the record when I do review stuff separately, and I'm now I have to put a disclaimer out before I review anything from Modifius, is one of the things that I think we do extremely well is splat books. And splat books, to give listeners an idea, it's source books that add to the universe. It might be like, for example, I used to use that term interchangeably with Star Wars West End games, with like, hey, here's something on fantastic technology, here's a bunch of planets you don't know about, here's something about the Empire's security bureau and stuff like that. But with Star Trek Adventures, we have so many source books, and they're all, you don't need them, but having them is wonderful, because you're right, they're so incredibly well done. There's such life and variety. Like, it's not just technical gobbledygook, which is wonderful.
I use them, but, like, I had the privilege of doing the Star Trek Explorer magazine story, and as I'm writing for fiction, Star Trek fiction, I have that stack of books next to me because I want to use terminology and stuff that's in there. There's a lot of Easter eggs and gems buried in that book. And these modules have been written by diehard Star Trek fans who know the minutest details from episodes, and it's all buried in these books. And if you read them, you crack up, because there's allusion to, like you've written sidebars, and you're alluding to maybe real events, and it's so obscure, and I look for that kind of stuff because the work's done for me, and I try to pull it into my fiction if I can.
Yeah, like, it's amazing how rich Star Trek Easter eggs can be. And I want to say Star Trek's the first place I think I ever heard that term applied. Like to go back in my nerd history, I remember looking for Easter eggs in X-Files episodes and thinking I was cool shit then. And then I remember finding books like the Nitpicker's Guide to TNG in the original series, thinking, wow, and I thought I was a dork.
Marvel was doing it in the movies. They definitely started laying Easter eggs in 2008.
It's kind of incredible just to see how much this fandom, this really family, has kind of grown amongst podcasts, books, different internet communities. And I remember a time when it used to be Star Wars versus Star Trek. And while that definitely still exists, it's interesting the fact that Star Trek has such a powerful role-playing game behind it now. Star Wars doesn't have one currently, in print that isn't just a reprint of an older edition, because I think Fantasy Flight Games was doing the old West End Games version. I don't know whether there's still one in print right now currently, but either way, there's no new books covering the Rise of Skywalker kind of stuff. But with Star Trek, we've put out stuff on Lower Decks. We put out stuff on, there's the Picard character packs. Like, that's something else too. I've never seen a game so well supported digitally. Like, we have iconic villains. You want to fight the Borg Queen? We got that covered. You want to play Mariner from season 2 of Lower Decks? We got that going on too.
Well, again, you got a hardcore fan. You have a hardcore fan, Jim Johnson, behind this, and Nathan Dowdell, who wrote the mechanics. Again, a hardcore Trek fan who, if you look at some of his interviews, Nathan Dowdell, he designed the game to match an episode of Star Trek. So it's not like they said, oh, here's a game system, shove it in here. This game was designed around how Star Trek episodes run. So that's why, again, I've had the pleasure of running these games for first timers, people who maybe are familiar with the TV show. And when they get done playing, they're like, oh my God, that felt just like an episode. I'm like, well, thank you. And that's how, Nathan Dowdell made it really easy with the game mechanics to do that.
Yeah, and it's something to see how the game mechanics have evolved, because like I have in my personal research library, God, it sounds weird to say that. I've got stuff from the FOSSA edition of Star Trek.
Yeah.
I have almost all the Last Unicorn books that were ever produced, which are surprisingly hard to track down at times. The Decipher books, but our system is so user friendly. Like it literally feels like you've got the LCAR system beside you, walking you through it. And you're right, it matches the vibe and feel. And role-playing games, at least in my experience, certain ones feel like the genre they're to represent. Like Shadowrun is a wonderful meld of technology and magic. It feels authentic. D&D is the gold standard, despite what you may think about the recent whatever, but it is fantasy. With Star Trek and high concept space adventure, it is. You're right. If you could have entire adventures, like you don't have to fight the Borg or the Dominion or whatever. You could be
we've had entire
stuff.
adventures that take place in one single room, and it's purely a moral dilemma. And people still hail it as one of the best games of all time. We've had holodeck episodes again that, it's what's cool about Star Trek and including Star Trek Adventures. It is the only game system that I can think of that can be every single genre you want to play. And we've seen it in the show. You can go back to Nottingham and play something Shakespearean. You could play a fantasy Dungeons and Dragons game in Star Trek by landing on a planet like that. You could play something scary like Aliens. You could play a James Bond adventure if you want to. You could go back in time. You can go anywhere in the universe. It's the only game that even if you have a bunch of people who are like, well, I'm into fantasy and trolls. It's like, okay, but we're going to play Star Trek and we're going to do episodes with trolls. It's just, it placates everyone, which is why, again, it holds the infinite diversity, infinite combination title.
Yeah, like you're right. Like just hearing you articulate it like that, I've never quite thought of it like that, but you've absolutely hit it right on the head. And it's fascinating just to see so many people love this game. And I guess as we begin to kind of close things out, because I know you have a mission briefing with certain people. I guess I would ask, have you ever run into anybody who's like, or actually, let me rephrase that. When you've had interactions with people in public, because I know you just did a convention, when you have people who come up and have read your work or have heard the podcast, what are some of your best memories from that, or ones that really will stick with you?
For sure. Well, I'll have two stories that are funny, actually. So I did Gen Con in 2023. This was after the solo RPG, Captain's Log solo RPG. I was the lead writer and a designer on that game. First time solo RPG for Modiphius. We got to do it with Star Trek. So I went to Gen Con and I had my book and I was just so happy about it. But I wanted people to sign my book. Now I know most authors want to, you go to get their book signed, but I had this thing, and I still have it here on my shelf, where I said, you know what? Everybody who's touched Star Trek Adventures or Captain's Log, I'm going to stand at the booth, and as they finish getting rung up for whatever they bought, if they bought something Star Trek, I'm going to say, hi, can you sign my book? And they're like, what? I'm like, well, I'm the writer of it, but I'm so into the fact that you're purchasing and playing the game, I want you to sign my book because I wouldn't be here if it's not for you. I'm a big fan. You're a big fan. Sign my book. And people were cracking up laughing. They're like, this is the first time an author has asked us to sign our book. And I got this idea, by the way, from Jim Johnson because he had done it at a convention a couple years before. And I said, oh, I love the idea. So I have this book now that I take with me to all the conventions. And now I have stars signing the book who play RPG or familiar with RPG. I have them, the writers, signing this book. So I kind of carried it around with me. So that was a great memory that I'm glad I started doing that because honestly, I would only be here and the game is only here because fans actually buy the game and play the game. So thank you, fans. I'm one too. And then the second memory was Gen Con's amazing if you've never been, but 75,000 people playing games. So I said, well, I'm going to go and spy on people playing Star Trek's Adventures because there's probably maybe 10 or 15 tables or rooms doing it. So I was standing at one table, just listening in. I'm curious. I want to hear how they run the games. And the game master and one of the other people recognized me from the podcast because we're on YouTube,
Oh.
so people can see how I look. So all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my god, that's Michael from the podcast!" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm just watching. I'm just watching." But I threw them off completely. Like they started asking me, like, "Oh, is that the right thing?" I was like, "Okay, I wanted to watch you anonymously." I said, "But I'm going to back away so you all can have fun because I see I'm making you nervous." So I walked away. So I thought that was hilarious that I was actually recognized. And it happened again at Gen Con. People recognize me because if you're into Star Trek Adventures and listen to if you type in anything about it, you're going to see me or Jim Johnson out there. So that's kind of weird to be recognized. So even though I'm at well, I shouldn't say that. Even though I'm in the smallest niche of Star Trek fandom, I believe, I think RPGs are probably the smallest niche. It's nice to know that, I'm kind of like a known component of that small niche. So that's fun. I never thought that would happen.
Now, there is something that happened to you recently, and I am incredibly jealous because I have only encountered this person from a car length away, but you got a chance to meet them. Please
Kate
tell me how you met Kate
Mulgrew!
Mulgrew. Please.
She's my favorite captain of all time. We could do a show just on that. And it's at the San Francisco Fan Expo that happened, at the end of November, 2024. And I knew she was going to be there, so I did sign up to get her autograph and a picture with her, understanding that people are going to be shuffling through. But I still have to say, even though, she was nice, we had a very brief conversation when she's signing my book, my Utopia Planitia book from Star Trek Adventures. Her gravitas was so powerful. Like she's so consummately a stage presence that I never saw her on Broadway. I wish I had, because I can tell if I was at the very back balcony that her presence would carry. Like to exist like that as a person is just so. I mean, I've met Leonard Nimoy and had a conversation with Leonard Nimoy, and he didn't carry that level of gravitas. It was really impressive. So she lived up to everything I dreamed about Catherine Janeway, if I was ever to meet the real captain. And I have a picture with her now. I put it on my bed next to my wife, which she made me remove, but she wouldn't let me sleep with my Kate Mulgrew picture. But it's here. I'm looking at it now.
That's incredible. I mean, we live in such a blessed time where we can meet these celebrities at conventions. Like it's on my bucket list. I want to meet Kate Mulgrew. I want to meet Garrett Wong and Thomas Duncan McNeil.
I know
Like,
them because I am a Delta flyer, so I fortunately have had great conversations with them. I mean, as one of their Patreon sponsors, I've had 15 minutes alone with them just to shoot the breeze, which has been super fun. And they're the nicest, coolest, down to earth people. If you support their Delta Flyers program. And my number one, just if anyone asks, my number one person I look forward to meeting, I've already had an opportunity to write about her extensively in Star Trek Adventures and in Star Trek fiction, is Jeri Ryan, 7 of 9. That's my favorite character of all time. So hopefully one day I get to meet her and let her know what an impact she's had on my career.
it has certainly been a strange journey for us as Star Trek writers. I am humbled that people like you and Jim have welcomed me aboard the ship, Modifius, such as it may be. Mike, thank you for taking time, for having me on your show and continuing conversations. My episode's available over on their website, which if people wanted to find or listen to in general, where would they have to go?
Yeah, anyway, so if they type in continuing conversations, Star Trek Adventures, it's going to pop up all kinds of places they can get the podcast. All of the large podcast services carry us. And of course, YouTube, just type in continuing conversations, Star Trek Adventures, and they'll find us.
Now, what are some of the projects people can look forward to in 2025 coming up from you that you can talk about?
Oh boy. Okay. So non-Star Trek related, Ashland is an amazing RPG that uses the 2D20 system. You can get it on Drive-Thru RPG. My friend Troy Mepiens, he's a writer of it. He's the creator of it, actually, and I was able to do some work on it, editing and writing. So Ashland's going to be a hot pickup if you like dystopian, post-apocalyptic type gaming. It's really fun read. And then another one is called Sentience, and this was done by Al Spador, who's a big writer for Star Trek Adventures and a bunch of other stuff. He owns a gaming shop too. He owns a game shop, but Sentience is mind blowing. It's your robots humanity has left behind, and the robots wake up without humanity present, and so they have to kind of evolve and develop their society, wondering if humanity's coming back to see how these robots work. So that Sentience is a really good thing. I've been able to write for them, and I'm a producer for that RPG. And then I have some stuff coming out. I have some novels. I'm not going to talk about what they are yet, but I plan to have 3 novels written by the end of 2025. And I'm hoping for the first time in my life, I can go ahead and publish, some novels to have on my nightstand with my name on it, some sci-fi novels. So we'll see how that turns out.
Well, Mike, thank you for coming on the show. I said I cannot thank you enough for being so gracious and welcoming to me. You are always welcome back here on This Week in Geek. I hope we have many more conversations because I do want to pick your brain more about writing and the creative process. So, guys, that has been my conversation with Michael Dismuke. You can find him on Continuing Conversation. Dismuke, sorry. God damn it. I suck. It's one of those days, guys.
Don't ask me to pronounce your last name right now. Ashkaway?
Yeah.
Ashkaway?
Ashkawi. Close enough. See, we both have those names. But seriously, it has been an absolute pleasure. So guys, please go check out their podcast. Please don't be too embarrassed over my appearance over there. I hope I'm remembering that Robert Picardo story right, because I've literally lost sleep thinking, oh God, did this actually happen? So anyway, I have been Mike the Birdman. He has been Mike Dismuke.
Nope.
Did I get it right? God,
you got it wrong. Leave it there. You got to leave it that way now.
Someone's gonna laugh. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here before I make a bigger fool out of myself. So anyway, I've been Mike the Birdman saying, may all your rolls be natural 20s.
Accessing library computer data.
Hey guys, post fun show edit right here. So this was a suggestion by Michael and I love it. So normally I'd say, may all your rolls be natural 20s, except in Star Trek where that's a complication. That's bad. You don't want that. Anyway, enjoy. Happy holidays, guys. We'll catch you guys again in 2025, where it won't be a complication. I hope.
Command functions are offline.